On this segment, we're coming to you from Weehawken, New Jersey. Now, if you look behind me, you see the New York City skyline, the Manhattan skyline. Something that happened here, July 11, 1804, a very pivotal moment in American history. A sitting vice president of the United States killed a former secretary of the Treasury. Two brilliant statesmen, one cut down early in his career, right here in Weehawken, New Jersey. In this segment, we take a look at dueling at the dueling grounds in New Jersey. An affair of honor, or so it was called in 1804. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, Alexander Hamilton being a former Secretary of the Treasury, a Revolutionary War hero. Aaron Burr, also a Revolutionary War hero, and at that time, Vice President of the United States. These two men had had a simmering feud that had built up for over a decade. A series of public exchanges, robberies, political and personal, got these two men to the point where Aaron Burr finally challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. Part of what caused dueling was this idea of a man having to maintain his honor. And if a man was insulted, or if his wife was insulted, or his family insulted, or if he was accused of being corrupt in some way, he had no chance but to defend his honor. And if that meant participating in a duel, then so be it. Is this attitude totally extinct? And those days, these same men we're talking about, well, why didn't they just take the person to court and sue him civilly? It wasn't an option, because a man who did that was admitting he couldn't solve his own problems, and that was a sign of weakness. Although there were a number of factors that contributed to their rivalry, the straw that broke the camel's back, some letters appeared in an Albany, New York newspaper calling Aaron Burr a cat line, if there ever was one. And the letters were traced back to Alexander Hamilton. What was a cat line? Cat line was a first century Roman senator who conspired to overthrow the Roman Empire. Nowadays, when a politician, or anyone else for that matter, has someone they don't like, they flippantly compare them to Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin without thinking anything about it. A person could not have gotten away with that in the early 19th century, particularly if the person was a public figure. Living in the public eye, a high-profile public profile, was not risk-free. If a man insulted another man in some way, there were 4 or 5 labels, 4 or 5 things that a man could not let go unchallenged. And that was what happened between Burr and Hamilton. Although the men had a rivalry that had been going on for decades, really, ever since the Revolutionary War, and it got worse in the 1790s and culminated in the duel in 1804, there were bright moments. Alexander Hamilton was challenged to a duel by U.S. Senator and future President James Monroe. Monroe accused Hamilton of using public funds to pay extortion money to the husband of a woman he had had an affair with. Well, it got out that Hamilton used public funds for this, which was not true. James Monroe made that accusation. They call this area the dueling grounds for a good reason. The duel between Burr and Hamilton was not the first and not the last, unfortunately, to take place in this area right here. In fact, in 1802, just 2 years prior to Alexander Hamilton being killed, his son Philip was also killed in a duel by a political ally of Aaron Burr's, and it also happened right here. In fact, when Alexander Hamilton was challenged to a duel, it was his right to pick the choice of weapons for the duel. He picked the same type of weapon that killed his son Philip 2 or 3 years prior. The night before their duel, Alexander Hamilton, as a lot of men did in certain similar situations, he sat down and wrote out a sort of a last will and testament in case he did not survive the duel. What's interesting is, duels are most often fought at dawn, at the crack of dawn. He didn't even tell his wife where he was going. Both men lived in New York City, in Manhattan, right across the river here. So it was common for, in those situations, for the duel to take place in a state other than where the men lived, if that was an option. And that was an option here. As you can see, New York is right across the river here. And so it was easy for someone from New York to row across the Hudson River, come over here to New Jersey, have their duel or whatever they had, and then go back to New York. That way, they might be safe from prosecution because the duel occurred in another state. On the morning of July 11th, 1804, the duel is going to happen. Aaron Burr arrives first, about 6:30 a.m. He is accompanied by his second and by an oarsman who brings them in across the river. Hamilton arrives about 7 a.m. along with his second and a physician, and of course the man who was rowing across the river. The physician stayed in the boat and would not get out and go witness the duel. That way he would not violate his Hippocratic oath, at least officially, and he would have plausible deniability as to what actually happened. The two seconds, it was their job, line the men up to act as referees more or less, to inspect the weapons, and at a certain point, one of the seconds had the job of saying to the two men, present, with the accent on the second syllable. Present meant fire. And that's what happened. They fired. So the two men square off with each other. Hamilton requested his second give him his spectacles. He needs to see what he's aiming at. After being told to present, the two men fire. Burr's bullet strikes Hamilton in his midsection, causes Hamilton to be paralyzed. As for Hamilton's shot, what happened? He did fire. Question remains is, did he fire at Burr, or did his gun go off involuntarily once he was struck? In any case, his bullet was lodged in a tree nearby. Hamilton had said the night before in his last will and testament, more or less, that he realized he may pass away. He also indicated that he might throw away his first shot, which was common. It was a common way of avoiding fatalities. Perhaps he assumed Burr would throw away his first shot as well, but he did not. So, Burr's second takes him away from the scene, covers his face. They get in the boat, go back across the Hudson River to New York City. Hamilton is paralyzed. He tells the doctor who comes to attend him, I believe this wound is fatal, and he was correct. So Hamilton, his second, the physician, and the oarsman all go back to Manhattan as well. Well, even though there were no radios and TVs and the internet and so forth in that day, word of what happened here in Weehawken spread like wildfire in Manhattan, and sympathy came squarely down in favor of the wounded Alexander Hamilton. Burr became an instant villain. Hamilton was laying paralyzed in his bed at home. He requested the services of ministers. One minister refused to administer communion to Hamilton, saying he didn't believe in dueling, that dueling was more or less a form of suicide. The second minister comes along. He does the same thing. He does not administer last rites either. He says it would be insincere, would violate church doctrine to administer last rites to someone while they're sick in bed. So the first minister, Benjamin Moore, not the paint guy, he comes back and finally agrees to administer last rites to Alexander Hamilton. So Hamilton, although in agony, can at least die in some sort of spiritual peace, and he passes away. Now, unfortunately, this was not the first duel to occur on these grounds here in Weehawken, and the Burr-Hamilton duel was not the last. The United States had a very difficult time getting its men of honor, so to speak, to behave properly and not kill each other in duels, particularly in the South. Although this duel occurred here in New Jersey, most duels occurred, a majority of duels occurred that we know of in the southern United States. It took several decades for a dueling to disappear in America as part of American culture. It would not be politicians or judges or prosecutors or law enforcement officials, such as they existed at the time, that would put an end to dueling. It was Christian ministers. Christian ministers stood the pulpits and said that dueling is a form of suicide, and suicide is just as great a sin as murder itself, and that dueling was a form of self-suicide or self-murder. Gradually, that opinion began to take shape and take hold more and more, before finally, dueling came to an end for the most part in the 1860s in the southern part of the United States. Another very unfortunate thing that happened as a result of the Burr-Hamilton duel and other duels that occurred at this famous spot. This spot became the best known place in the country where dueling occurred. And as many people argue that dueling was a form of suicide or self-murder, people who indeed actually wanted to commit suicide would come to this spot. Unfortunately, this has been a common suicide spot for many decades, long after the Burr Hamilton feud occurred. As you see the New York skyline behind me from Weehawken, New Jersey, one thing worth mentioning is the interest in the duel between Burr and Hamilton has increased tremendously because of the popularity of a Broadway musical called Hamilton, which is based on the life of Alexander Hamilton. So, is the possible reason that we have so many men killing each other today out of a sense of honor? Is it because that attitude is still alive and well in our culture? Perhaps, perhaps not.